I walked into the boardroom with my hands slightly shaking, not from nerves, but from the quiet anticipation of what was supposed to be a career-defining moment. 3 years. That's how long I'd poured myself into this company, my husband's family's company, giving it everything I had. Extra hours, skipped holidays, missed anniversaries, all for this, all for today. As I stepped in, the room was already full. My husband, Daniel, sat near the end of the long glass table. He gave me a soft smile, encouraging, but unsure. That was Daniel, sweet, supportive, but never the one to speak when it truly mattered. Harold, my father-in-law and the company's CEO, stood near the head of the table with a wide grin on his face. He looked proud, almost giddy. For a second, I felt the warmth rise in my chest. I thought, he's finally going to say it. Finally going to acknowledge everything I've done. I sat down, carefully placing my notebook in front of me, spine straight, heart steady. "Good morning, everyone," Harold began. "Thank you for being here. This is a big day for the company." Heads nodded around the table. A few glanced at me with polite smiles. Some of them already knew, or so I thought. Harold continued, "As you know, we've been searching for the right person to take on the role of Senior Vice President of Operations. Someone with leadership, drive, and a strong understanding of our values." My throat tightened. I didn't dare blink. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp sheet of paper. "After careful consideration, I'm proud to announce that the position will be filled by someone with incredible potential. Please welcome our new Senior VP, Sierra Blake." For a moment, it felt like my brain couldn't catch up with my ears. Sierra? His niece? The girl who just joined us? 5 weeks ago? There was a pause in the room, just one awkward second of confused silence, before light clapping broke out. I didn't clap. I couldn't. I looked at Harold, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Waiting for the part where he said, "Just kidding, Rachel, you're the real deal." But it didn't come. Then my eyes shifted to Sierra. She stood at the far end of the room, beaming. She looked radiant in her powder blue blazer, blonde curls bouncing as she gave a little wave like she'd just been crowned prom queen. My stomach flipped. I turned to Daniel. He wasn't clapping either. His lips were parted, brows furrowed. He looked just as blindsided, but he didn't say a word. Harold's voice filled the silence again. "I know some of you may be surprised, but Sierra represents the fresh leadership this company needs to step into the next decade. Young, innovative, and deeply connected to this family's legacy." My hands were clenched tightly in my lap now, fingernails pressing half-moons into my skin. I forced myself to smile. I don't know how I managed it. It felt mechanical, like my body was performing a role while my soul quietly stepped out of the room. I stood up. The movement caught everyone's attention. Conversation stopped. Harold looked up at me, half confused, half annoyed. I looked directly at Sierra, still smiling. "Congrats to Sierra," I said calmly. "Truly." And with that, I picked up my notebook, turned around, and walked out of the boardroom. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I passed reception. The hallway seemed colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the metal doors. I didn't look broken, but I was. Not because I didn't get the promotion, but because after everything I'd done, every late night, every sacrifice, every time I put their needs above my own, they didn't even see me. And worse, they didn't even care. It all started 3 years ago. Harold had just come back from a conference in Chicago, and the company was barely staying afloat. Sales had dipped. Operations were a mess. Longtime clients were leaving quietly, and no one knew how to stop the bleeding. That's when he called me. "Rachel," he said on the phone, "I know you're comfortable at your current job, but we could really use your help here." At the time, I was working as an operations consultant at a private firm. Comfortable salary, clear boundaries, and a team that respected me. But Harold was family. He didn't ask for help often, and Daniel, my husband, gently pushed, "It could be good, Rach. You'd be close to home, part of the family business. We'd be building something together." So, I said yes. I walked away from a secure job and took a massive pay cut to join Evans Corporation. No title negotiations, no grand promises, just trust. From the very first week, I rolled up my sleeves and dove straight into the problems. Their vendors were overpriced, their delivery system was outdated, and the operations team was understaffed and untrained. No one had touched the logistics software in years. I didn't complain. I created a new operations flow in 2 weeks and personally trained the staff on how to use it. When their inventory system crashed, I stayed up till 3 a.m., fixing it with IT, not because it was my job, but because no one else knew how. Every time something went wrong, they called me. And every time I fixed it, Harold would clap me on the back and say, "You're the glue holding this place together." I believed him. Even when I missed my sister's wedding anniversary trip because the company had an urgent client audit, I told myself it was worth it. I kept saying, "One day, this will pay off." There were no boundaries between work and life. I took calls during dinners, checked emails in the middle of movie nights, and showed up every Saturday when Harold asked for just a few hours of help. Daniel noticed. He'd sometimes say, "You're burning the candle at both ends," but never pushed back too hard. After all, we were both part of the family business. Sacrifice was expected. But I didn't mind at first. I thought I was building something. I thought I was earning trust, loyalty, respect. After a year, I turned the company's operations around. Clients who had quietly left began to return. Profits rose. Harold gave me a Christmas bonus and said, "You've saved this company more times than I can count." But still, no promotion, no formal title, just more responsibility. The second year, I asked him directly if there was any talk about a leadership role. Harold smiled and said, "You're doing great things, Rachel. Let's not rush. Timing is everything." I believed him again. Because I wanted to. Because I thought hard work and patience still meant something. By the third year, I was leading strategy meetings, handling vendor negotiations, managing international partnerships, and onboarding every new hire. Some of the newer employees thought I was already a VP. They'd ask, "Are you the one running things around here?" I'd smile and say, "Just doing my part." But deep down, I kept waiting for Harold to officially recognize me. I didn't need a party or a plaque, just the title I'd earned. Every time performance reviews came around, I prepared. I practiced what I'd say. I hoped this would be the moment he'd finally see me as more than just a helping hand. Instead, he'd nod and say, "Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing it well." That was the pattern. Endless giving, endless hoping, and no real acknowledgement. I thought the promotion announcement would finally close that chapter, that all the years of sacrifice would be seen. But now, sitting alone in my car, staring blankly at the steering wheel, I realized something. They never planned to promote me. They were always happy for me to do the work, but never enough to give me the title. I still remember the day Sierra Blake walked into the office. It was a Monday morning, and Harold had sent out a short internal memo the night before saying we'd have a new face in operations. No resume, no formal introduction, just a vague line about bringing fresh perspective to the team. Sierra arrived 15 minutes late. She breezed in like she owned the place, high heels clicking, oversized sunglasses still on, phone in one hand, latte in the other. She didn't apologize, didn't even look flustered. "Hi, I'm Sierra," she said with a wide smile. "I think I'm supposed to be somewhere important?" I stood up to greet her. "You're in the right place. I'm Rachel. I run the operations department." She glanced at my outstretched hand and gave it a half-hearted shake. Her eyes were already scanning the room. "Cool. So where's Uncle Harold?" That was my first red flag. Uncle Harold. I didn't know she was part of the family. No one told me, not even Daniel. When I asked Harold about it later, he just laughed and said, "She's Michael's cousin. I thought you knew. She just finished her MBA, so I figured we'd give her a taste of the business." Taste? This wasn't a bakery. Still, I told myself to be professional. I offered to help her settle in, walk her through the systems, introduce her to the teams. But she barely paid attention. When I explained how we handled logistics, she yawned. When I mentioned our biggest clients, she said, "Oh, I think I heard of one of them." Or maybe not. She couldn't even pronounce a few of the client names correctly. One time, in front of a supplier, she referred to a partnership we'd spent months securing as some wine company thing. I nearly choked, but Harold just chuckled. "She's still learning," he said. Then he looked at me and added, "Why don't you take her under your wing?" So I did. For 5 weeks, I held her hand through everything, even when she didn't ask. I fixed her calendar. I corrected her mistakes in meetings. I resent emails she forgot to follow up on. She never thanked me, not once. And still, things got stranger. By the end of her second week, she was invited to senior meetings I wasn't even copied on. One morning, I found out she had been added to the executive strategy group chat, a chat I had never been invited to in 3 years. I walked into Harold's office and gently asked, "I noticed Sierra's sitting in on high-level meetings now. Should I be concerned?" He looked up from his papers, shrugged, and said, "She's family. She should understand the bigger picture." I nodded slowly. "So, she's being groomed for leadership?" He waved a hand. "Don't worry about titles, Rachel. Just keep doing what you're doing. You've always been solid." Solid. That word hit me harder than I expected. It sounded like a compliment, but in Harold's mouth it felt like a ceiling. Still, I stayed quiet. Daniel kept saying, "It's just temporary. Sierra's probably just here to explore. You've got nothing to worry about." But I watched the signs pile up. By week 4, Sierra had been assigned her own assistant, a girl from HR who used to support my entire department. By week 5, she stopped asking questions altogether. She strutted through the office like she belonged at the top. She referred to Harold as my uncle in meetings like it was a badge. And me? I was now the person in the corner, the one expected to keep things running while someone else got the spotlight. The shift was subtle, but real. People started going to Sierra with questions instead of me. Even the interns noticed. I wasn't just being overlooked anymore. I was being erased. It was a Thursday morning when it happened. I walked into the office just like any other day, balancing my coffee in one hand and my laptop bag in the other. The lobby was quiet, almost too quiet. No cheerful greetings from the front desk, no casual nods from the junior staff. Just a strange silence that wrapped around me like fog. As I approached the operations wing, something felt off. My nameplate, the brushed silver one that had sat proudly beside my office door for nearly 3 years, was missing. In its place, a new one. Sierra Blake, Sater VP, Operations. I stared at it for a few seconds, unable to move. My heart didn't race, my stomach didn't flip. There was no explosion of emotion, just stillness. Then I looked down. A box sat beside the office door, closed but poorly taped. I knelt slowly and opened it. Inside were my things. Framed photos of Daniel and me, my coffee mug, a small plant I'd been keeping alive for almost 2 years, all carefully placed, as if someone wanted to avoid confrontation by making it look polite. I turned my head and peeked into the office. Sierra was in my chair. Her feet were propped on the corner of the desk, phone in hand, twirling a pen between her fingers like she'd been there forever. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Oh, hey, Rachel," she said casually. "Didn't they tell you?" I didn't answer. I looked around. The walls were still the same. My old calendar hung behind the desk. My favorite quote was still on the corkboard. "Leadership is earned, not given." She hadn't even taken it down. "I was told HR would reach out," Sierra added, still scrolling on her phone. "Uncle Harold said they were restructuring things. You're probably getting reassigned. Or something. Anyway, thanks for everything you showed me. Seriously." It took everything in me not to laugh. "Thanks for everything I showed you?" The girl didn't know how to process a single vendor invoice when she walked in. She didn't even know the difference between logistics and fulfillment 2 weeks ago. I looked at her one more time and quietly turned away. The hallway stretched out in front of me like a tunnel, every step I took echoing louder than the last. People watched me. No one said a word. I passed Harold's office. The door was closed. He hadn't even bothered to speak to me directly. When I reached the elevator, I set the box down and pressed the button with calm hands. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just waited. As the doors opened, I caught my reflection in the metal. There was no anger in my face, just clarity. I'd given this company everything: my ideas, my time, my loyalty, my weekends, my marriage's quiet moments. I made this place better, more efficient, more human. And now I was being pushed aside like I was just another intern who'd overstayed her welcome. No meeting, no conversation, no warning, just a nameplate replaced, and a box by the door. I carried my things to the car and placed them in the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, just breathing in silence. At home that evening, I made Daniel his favorite dinner. He noticed my quietness but didn't push. That was always his way: gentle concern, but never confrontation. After dinner, I kissed him on the cheek and walked into the study. Then I opened my laptop. I opened a blank document, and I wrote. Line by line, word by word, I poured the last 3 years into a resignation letter. No bitterness, no theatrics, just the truth. What they did, what they didn't do, and most importantly, what I was no longer willing to accept. I finished the letter, saved it as a PDF, and emailed it to myself. Then I leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling, and smiled for the first time in weeks. They had pushed me out without a word, but they would soon hear me loud and clear. The next morning, I woke up early. Earlier than usual, I ironed my favorite navy blouse, the one I'd worn on my first day at Evans Corporation. It still looked crisp, like I hadn't aged 3 years of stress and sacrifice in it. I tied my hair back neatly, added a swipe of lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was dressing to end things with dignity. The resignation letter sat folded in my purse, printed on thick paper. Simple, professional, direct. No pleading, no passive tone, just facts. And my goodbye. When I arrived at the office, everything looked the same. But somehow, I felt like I was floating just slightly above it all. I wasn't part of this place anymore. I was an observer now, and that made all the difference. I walked straight past the reception and into the main hallway. Heads turned as I passed, but no one said a word. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't. But the energy in the building felt different. Quiet. Like it knew a storm was coming. Harold was in the executive conference room with Sierra, Daniel, and the rest of the leadership team. Through the glass walls, I could see Sierra mid-laugh, leaning back in my old chair, her chair now. I opened the door. Every head turned. Harold looked up with a forced smile. "Rachel, didn't expect you this morning." I returned the smile, calm and measured. "Just a quick stop." Sierra smirked but said nothing. She tapped her pen against the table like she was waiting for me to leave. I stepped forward and placed the envelope directly in front of Harold. "This is for you," I said. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. Harold looked puzzled for a moment, then picked it up and began reading. Before he could get through the second paragraph, I turned to the room and said evenly, "Congrats to Sierra. I wish you all the very best." Daniel stood up suddenly. "Rachel, what?" But Harold cut him off. His face turned red as the realization hit him. "You can't be serious?" he barked, voice rising. "You're resigning?" I looked at him without blinking. "I am." "You're one of the best we've got," he shouted, waving the letter. "You've been running this place." "I know," I replied softly. His voice cracked. "You're overreacting. This is all because of Sierra?" Sierra's face froze for the first time. I shook my head. "This isn't about her. This is about respect. Or the lack of it." Daniel looked completely torn. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced between his father and me like a child watching two worlds fall apart at once. Harold slammed the envelope down. "This is ridiculous. You're family." "Exactly," I said. "And if this is how you treat family, then it's time I stop expecting anything from it. No yelling, no anger, just truth. I turned to Daniel one last time. His eyes searched mine, silently asking if I was sure. But he already knew the answer. I gave him a faint smile, then turned and walked out. I didn't look back. As I stepped through the glass doors and into the hallway, I felt weight lifting from my shoulders. Years of being overlooked, unheard, unseen. I passed the front desk. The receptionist gave me a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement, maybe even respect. I stepped into the elevator, alone. As the doors closed, I breathed in deep, not out of stress, but peace. I had been silent for 3 years. Now I had spoken, and they had heard me loud and clear. I didn't expect the fallout to happen so fast. By the end of that same week, whispers were already swirling through the halls of Evans Corporation. I hadn't even spoken publicly about my resignation, but people talked, quietly at first, then openly. I didn't have to explain anything. My absence explained everything. 3 senior managers resigned within 5 days. One by one, they walked out with boxes in hand and no goodbyes. These were people I had mentored, supported, and gone the extra mile for. And now they were following my lead. Even clients started calling. Some of the long-standing partners I had brought in began pulling out of their contracts. One vendor emailed Harold directly and wrote, "We're not comfortable continuing without Rachel overseeing operations." Daniel told me about that one. Quietly, late at night. He didn't say much else. He had been walking on eggshells since I left. I think part of him was proud of me, even if he wouldn't admit it. But Harold, he was livid. According to Daniel, he stormed around the office for hours after I left, shouting at HR, grilling team leads, demanding explanations. But none of them had any answers that satisfied him. Because the truth was simple. I had become the foundation. They just didn't realize it until I walked away. The people who stayed weren't loyal to Harold. They had stayed because of the environment I helped build, the systems I designed, the trust I earned. And Sierra? She wasn't ready. By her second week in charge, 2 shipments were delayed. A vendor pulled out due to miscommunication. And a major client had to resend documents 3 times because her team didn't know where to file them. She sent Daniel a message asking for my templates, the ones I had built from scratch over 3 years. I didn't respond. Instead, I started replying to job offers. Dozens of them. Some from competitors. Some from businesses I had once negotiated against. Word spreads fast in this industry, and people were eager to bring me on. I took my time. I wasn't desperate. I was deliberate. Then came the offer I didn't expect. From a company I had always admired. One that Harold once mocked as too modern for his tastes. They offered me a senior executive role with full autonomy, a signing bonus, and my own team. More than that, they gave me respect. They didn't ask me to prove myself again. They already knew. I accepted without hesitation. In my first week at the new company, I walked into a workspace where people greeted me by name. The CEO met me at the door. I wasn't introduced as Daniel's wife or Harold's daughter-in-law. I was just Rachel Evans. And that was enough. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a contract proposal, I got a text from Daniel. "Harold wants to talk to you." I stared at the message for a while, then I turned off my phone. I had said what I needed to say. They didn't listen when I was inside the building, and now it was too late to shout from the outside. Evans Corporation was unraveling, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. They thought I left quietly, but my silence was louder than they could handle. I never expected peace to feel this sweet. My mornings weren't rushed anymore. No angry calls from Harold, no passive-aggressive sighs from Sierra, no late-night policy rewrites. I drank my coffee slowly now, savoring it, not gulping it between meetings. At my new office, people smiled when I walked in. They asked for my input and actually listened. My calendar was full, but never chaotic. I was working hard, but this time, for myself. But then, something unexpected happened. One Thursday afternoon, I received a thick envelope. It came by courier, no note, no return address, but the logo on the letterhead, it was unmistakable. Evans Corporation. I opened it slowly. Inside were internal memos, financial records, and, most shocking of all, a formal request for mediation signed by Harold himself. He was suing Sierra. I blinked. The pages told a story I hadn't expected to see so soon. Botched client renewals, budget overruns, and unapproved bonuses Sierra had authorized for herself and her friends. She had apparently funneled funds through a shell vendor, one I had flagged during my final month, but no one listened. Now, Harold was trying to distance himself from it all, claiming she had misled him, that he was relying on the wrong people. But here's the part that made me sit back in my chair. He was asking me to testify, as a witness. The irony almost made me laugh. The man who once dismissed me as just support was now begging for my credibility to salvage what was left of his empire. Daniel called me that night. "I didn't know she was doing all that," he said, voice low. "She said she had it under control." "She always said that," I replied, "even when she didn't." There was a pause, then softly he added, "He misses you at the office." I let the silence speak for itself. Then I said, "He never saw me when I was there. Why would he see me now?" The next day, I sent a brief letter through my lawyer. "I will not be participating in any mediation or legal proceedings. Please do not contact me further." I owed them nothing. Not anymore. My life had moved on. And theirs? Well, let's just say karma arrived right on time. Sierra was removed from her position 2 weeks later. Harold made a public statement blaming internal mismanagement. But clients weren't fooled. Half of them had already walked. And Daniel? He quietly handed in his resignation. I don't know what he plans to do next, or if he even knows who he is without his father's shadow. But that's his journey now, not mine. Mine led me here, to peace, purpose, and power I built on my own terms. I no longer needed to prove anything. Not to a man who couldn't see my worth. Not to a family that thought loyalty meant silence. And not to a company that crumbled the moment I walked out the door. They thought replacing me was easy. But now they know. Some people aren't just employees. We're the reason the whole system works. And once we leave, there's no going back.